33-year-old mother of three, Tioni Jones was found stabbed to death at her home on Chicago's South Side on February 27, 2025, shortly after speaking with her mother on the phone about her dinner plans. She was going about her usual day when she was attacked at around 4:30 p.m. by the father of her youngest child, who was later identified by police as 39-year-old Marcus Bausley. Two of the victim's sons were also stabbed and survived their injuries. They were both kidnapped and were rescued after one of the boys escaped from their captor's car and ran door to door in search of help. Bausley was arrested the next day following a high-speed pursuit along Interstate 65 in Lake County, Indiana. He was extradited to Illinois but is yet to be formally charged in connection with the case. Records show that he was released from custody, leaving the current status of the case unclear. Number 24. Evelina Fabianski.
Stop.
I wasn't involved in this. I wasn't involved in
Who
this.
is involved?
I wasn't involved in this.
All right, shut your car off. Who is this? Hey, I don't care. Stay over here. Stay over here.
In what appears to be a poorly conceived revenge plot against an ex-boyfriend, a Florida teen is facing charges in Volusia County for spray painting the wrong car, which she believed belonged to her former beau. According to law enforcement, 18-year-old Evelina Fabianski used yellow spray paint to scrawl nasty words all over someone's black Infiniti, only to later realize that her ex-boyfriend doesn't own an Infiniti. She was reportedly mad at the victim, who supposedly owed her $700, and targeted the car because it was parked in front of his Deltona residence. Fabianski was arrested shortly before 3 o'clock in the morning, after deputies responded to a vandalism call and spotted her alleged accomplice walking away from the scene. The unnamed female denied having anything to do with the incident, but the yellow paint on her clothing led law enforcement to believe otherwise. Meanwhile, deputies found Fabianski sitting in the driver's seat of a nearby Suzuki sedan, where they spotted 2 open cans of 4 Loco. Inside the vehicle, both suspects reportedly confessed during questioning, with the younger woman admitting that the pair had also thrown eggs at the victim's car. She told police that the vandalism was Fabianski's idea and that she had merely tagged along and participated. Investigators also spoke with the Infiniti's owner, who lived across the street from where the car was parked. Damages to the vehicle were estimated at $5,000, and the 2 teens were charged with criminal mischief over $1,000. Fabianski is facing additional charges of driving under the influence, contributing to the delinquency of a minor, and possession of an alcoholic beverage by a person under 21, and is currently free on bond. The young women's arrests have captured widespread social media attention, where the Volusia County Sheriff's Office posted a photo of the damaged vehicle along with the caption, "Oops, wrong car."
You really need to try harder to try to be sneaky, because you are god awful. You guys spray painted the wrong damn car. Yeah, it's that neighbor's car.
Number 23. Erika Sandoval. After undergoing an acrimonious divorce, 31-year-old Daniel Green of Tulare County, California, was excited to find love again. In February 2015, he posted a picture of himself with his new girlfriend on social media, and it was likely no coincidence that his ex-wife Erika Sandoval bombarded him with over 160 phone calls and text messages. Just days later, less than a week after posting the photo, Green was shot dead in his bathroom by a home intruder. Police were quick to narrow their sights on Sandoval, whom Green's surviving loved ones described as abusive. Green's twin brother, Matt, later told 48 Hours that he believed Daniel stayed in the marriage despite being a police officer and knowing the signs of abuse, because he probably felt trapped. The mistreatment supposedly continued even after Sandoval and Green divorced, with the former couple even occasionally still spending the night together. It was during one of these post-breakup trysts that Sandoval became pregnant, prompting Green to give their relationship another try. But it didn't last, and within months of his son's birth, Green told his friends that he believed Sandoval had tried to kill him by cutting the brake lines on his motorcycle. Following Green's death, Sandoval was charged with his murder. She's currently on trial for a second time after the first trial ended in a mistrial due to a hung jury. Taking the stand in her own defense, Sandoval admitted to shooting Green several times, but claimed that she acted in self-defense after he charged at her in a fit of rage while threatening to kill her. Prosecutors dispute this narrative, arguing that Sandoval murdered her ex-husband out of jealousy after seeing the picture of Green and his new girlfriend on social media. To back their case, the state highlighted how Sandoval acted normal after Green's death, as if nothing had happened. The prosecution has also pointed out that the police found a note in Sandoval's purse with Green's girlfriend's name written on it, which they believe further points toward a motive to kill. During her testimony, Sandoval admitted that she had gone about her day as usual after shooting her ex-husband, but she claimed that the reality of what had happened had not yet sunk in. The outcome of the trial remains to be seen. Number 22. Travion Dean. 22-year-old Travion Dean of Fort Pierce, Florida, was welcomed home from a trip to Jamaica with open arms courtesy of Brevard County prosecutors who are accusing him of murdering his ex-girlfriend. According to investigators, Dean and 20-year-old Anaya Shepard were sharing a room at an extended stay hotel in West Melbourne when they took a ride share to a manufactured home community in early November of 2024. Surveillance footage showed the former couple being dropped off in the same area where deputies found Shepard shot to death during the early morning hours. Further investigation revealed that after the shooting, Dean took another ride share back to the hotel where he was seen leaving a short while later with Shepard's belongings in his possession. The victim's family members reportedly described the relationship between Dean and Shepard as toxic and violent. Dean was arrested on charges of premeditated first-degree murder and evidence tampering in January 2025 after landing at the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport on his inbound flight from Jamaica. He pleaded not guilty and is currently being held without bond at the Brevard County Jail as he awaits his next court hearing. Number 21. Andrew Reedy. A Trumbull County, Ohio man was so enraged after being kicked out of his ex-girlfriend's Massery home that he went back there and shot his former lover dead just days before Christmas in 2024. 57-year-old Jane Payton had formerly evicted 57-year-old Andrew Reedy, who broke into the residence and killed Payton with a single gunshot wound. A 22-hour standoff ensued before Reedy was rushed to the hospital with a gunshot wound to his face. He survived his injuries and initially pleaded not guilty to aggravated murder and aggravated burglary, but he had an apparent change of heart and pleaded guilty as charged just weeks before his trial was scheduled to begin in March of 2025. The judge sentenced Reedy to life with the possibility of parole after 23 years, including a mandatory 3-year consecutive term for a gun specification. Reedy was also classified as a violent offender and will be required to register as such even after his release from prison. During his sentencing hearing, Reedy said that he was genuinely sorry for his actions, but the apology and sentence falls short of justice for Payton's sister, who said during a victim impact statement that she believed Reedy deserved the death penalty. Number 20. Joseph Nesbitt. In February 2025, 36-year-old Jessica Dalton of Clarkston, Idaho, was found murdered inside the Lewiston residence of her ex-boyfriend, 38-year-old Joseph Nesbitt. Officers arrived at the home to find Dalton deceased and Nesbitt suffering from a life-threatening gunshot wound to the head. Nesbitt survived and is now facing a first-degree murder charge. According to investigators, Nesbitt lured Dalton to the crime scene under the pretense of wanting to see her dog, who was in Dalton's care at the time. The case has met with repeated delays due to medical problems, presumably resulting from Nesbitt's gunshot injury, but prosecutors remain intent on seeing the charges through. He pleaded not guilty and could face life in prison without the possibility of parole if convicted as charged. Number 19. Cedric Marks. Former MMA fighter Cedric Marks made international news headlines in early 2019 when he was charged with the murders of his ex-girlfriend, 28-year-old Jenna Scott, and her new partner, 32-year-old Michael Swearingen, in Killeen, Texas. The victims' bodies had been found in a shallow grave that January, resulting in Marks' arrest the following month. He briefly escaped from a custody transport vehicle just days later, but was captured hours later after being found in a dumpster outside a McDonald's restaurant in Conroe. While awaiting trial for the murders the following year, Marks was charged with the cold case murder of his child's mother, April Pease, who vanished in Minnesota in 2009. Pease's body was never found, but Marks became a person of interest in the case following his arrest for the murders of Scott and Swearingen nearly a decade later. According to authorities, Pease had sought refuge at a women's shelter after repeated domestic assaults by Marks. While investigating the case, police discovered evidence indicating that Marks and a woman named Kelly Christine Sorensen had traveled to Minnesota and abducted Pease from her shelter. Prosecutors believe that Marks killed Pease while Sorensen waited in a vehicle nearby, and both suspects have been charged in connection with the case. In 2023, Marks was found guilty of murdering Scott and Swearingen. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection and is still waiting to face a second-degree murder charge in Hennepin County, Minnesota, for Pease's death. According to the most recent available update, Sorensen's competency to stand trial is currently being examined, which could perhaps explain why the case seems to be dragging its heels in court. Authorities believe Pease's remains are in or around Clearwater, Oklahoma area due to Marks' connections to the area. A $2,000 reward is being offered for information leading to the discovery of the long-missing woman's body. Number 18. Nicholas Matzen. 23-year-old Emily Rogers was last seen alive on April 26, 2022. She was reported missing 4 days later after a friend received concerning Facebook messages from Rogers stating that her ex-boyfriend, 35-year-old Nicholas Matzen, had showed up at her Milwaukee, Wisconsin home. Just days earlier, Rogers had told her friend that she was planning to end her tempestuous and toxic relationship with Matzen. At the time, Matzen was in jail for an unrelated hit-and-run case. He was released the day after Rogers was last seen, which was the same day her friend received messages about Matzen showing up at her home during a conversation. Rogers explained that she literally had to force Matzen to leave her residence. She said she would call her friend in a minute, but that was the last anyone heard from her. 2 days after she was reported missing, the young woman's murdered body was found beneath a discarded Christmas tree near a retention pond. She had been strangled to death, and Matzen quickly became the prime suspect in the case, especially after neighbors told police that they had seen suspicious scratches on him after Rogers disappeared. Matzen told a neighbor that the scratches were from his dog, but neither he nor Rogers owned a dog. In the meantime, he reportedly admitted to a friend that he had strangled Rogers. He was charged with killing his ex-girlfriend, and in March of 2025, a jury found Matzen guilty of first-degree reckless homicide. He's currently awaiting sentencing, which is scheduled for April 17th. Number 17. Michael McCloud. In April 2024, news outlets in the Dallas-Fort Worth area reported on the arrest of 37-year-old Plano resident Michael McCloud, who was accused of being a porch pirate. He was nabbed a handful of months after local authorities appealed to the public for help identifying the serial package thief, who was also accused of burglarizing at least 7 vehicles. McCloud was initially charged with crimes related to stealing, but further investigation uncovered a sinister murder-for-hire plot. The discovery was made courtesy of a quick-thinking off-duty detective who crossed paths with McCloud by chance at a local diner and struck up a conversation. Unaware that the detective was a member of law enforcement, McCloud revealed his desire to kill his ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend and stated that he needed a silencer in order to get the job done. The detective, C. McIntyre, went with the flow and said he could help McCloud out, and the two exchanged contact information. McIntyre handed the information over to an investigator with the U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and federal authorities took over the case. Although McCloud originally wanted the silencer for himself, he reportedly decided throughout his interactions with an undercover ATF agent that he wanted someone else to kill the intended victims for him. Of course, things didn't go according to plan for McCloud, who was arrested for his attempt to hire a paid assassin. In early 2025, he pleaded guilty to a federal murder-for-hire charge. He has yet to be sentenced and is facing 15 years to life. Number 16. Abbigale Whipple. 24-year-old Kevin Christopher Gangel met an untimely end in late July of 2024 when he was fatally struck by a vehicle in broad daylight in Harwinton, Connecticut. According to preliminary reports, the car that hit Gangel while he was walking and sent him flying 70 feet was seen veering onto the shoulder for unknown reasons. Police soon discovered that the vehicle was occupied by a 21-year-old male suspect named Logan Diaz Lopardo, who was driving, and Gangel's ex-girlfriend, 20-year-old Abbigale Whipple. The two suspects reportedly gave law enforcement conflicting stories about what had happened, but the evidence helped detectives piece together a more consistent picture of the events that unfolded prior to the deadly collision. Gangel and Whipple had argued the night before the crash. When Whipple awoke the next morning, she discovered that Gangel had blocked her phone number. According to police, she became so enraged that she contacted Diaz Lopardo, whom she knew was obsessed with her and disliked Gangel. The two men had an established history of bad blood, which included previous threats toward one another, and investigators say that Whipple immediately led Diaz Lopardo on in her efforts to seek revenge against Gangel for blocking her. While searching Whipple's phone, investigators discovered threatening text messages to Gangel, including one which stated, "I warned you," and was sent just minutes before Gangel was killed. The device also contained text messages to Diaz Lopardo asking if they could beat Gangel's ass and saying she wanted Gangel hurt. Whipple claimed that she only threatened Gangel out of impulsivity and that she didn't really mean anything by it, but the authorities were unconvinced, and she is now facing charges of first-degree conspiracy to commit manslaughter and first-degree accessory to manslaughter. Diaz Lopardo was charged with first-degree manslaughter with the intent to injure, first-degree manslaughter with grave risk of death, and conspiracy to commit first-degree manslaughter. Both suspects remain in custody with bond set at $500,000 and will be on 24/7 house arrest if they manage to come up with enough money to secure their release. Number 15. Genesis Tanksley. On New Year's Eve in 2024, a woman dropped a male gunshot victim off at a Mobile, Alabama emergency room and left without explanation. Later identified as 27-year-old Genesis Patricia Tanksley, she now stands accused of shooting the victim, who happened to be her former husband, 30-year-old Lazarus Larry Tanksley. Lazarus died from his injuries, and Genesis was charged with his murder. According to news reports, Genesis showed up at a house where Lazarus was preparing to ring in the new year and shot him in cold blood during an argument. The victim's friends told local station WKRG that the Tanksleys were no longer together despite still being legally married and were living in separate residences at the time of the shooting. Their relationship had become strained long beforehand, according to those who know them, with Lazarus only staying with Genesis as long as he did out of a desire to stay connected to their 2 children. One friend, Kendrick Allen, described the marriage as a six-flag roller coaster compared to the usual ups and downs that typical relationships experience. Genesis allegedly stalked and harassed Lazarus for years, including by smashing his car windows and slashing his tires. Based on these claims, it may not be hard to believe that she's capable of murder, but Genesis asserted her innocence during a jailhouse interview with WKRG just days after her arrest. She told the station that law enforcement was wrongfully accusing her of murder, which she blamed on an unnamed male who supposedly tried getting into the backseat of her car. According to the accused killer's version of events, Lazarus came over to the car and opened the door, at which point the unidentified man pulled the trigger. Genesis admitted to dropping Lazarus off at the hospital without telling anyone what happened because, in her own words, the victim was already dead. She then drove to the home of her father, Andre Kostafan, who was reportedly so grief-stricken by his son-in-law's death that he immediately shut down upon hearing the news. Kostafan told WKRG that he knew his daughter was going to be accused of the murder and locked up. And that's exactly what happened. The case is ongoing and Genesis no longer appears to be in custody, indicating that she's most likely out on bond. Number 14. Dana Chandler. A deadly saga spanning 23 years and 3 trials recently came to an end following the conviction of an Oklahoma woman who killed her ex-husband and his new partner at the victim's Topeka, Kansas home back in July of 2002. Dana Chandler, who's now in her mid-60s, was first charged with the murder of Mike Cisco and his fiancée, Karen Harkness, in 2011. She and Cisco had divorced in 1998, roughly 3 years before the murders, and prosecutors alleged that the killing stemmed from a contentious child custody dispute, which had ended in a victory for Cisco and Harkness. By the time Chandler was charged, nearly a decade had passed since the victims were shot to death in their sleep, making justice already feel long awaited when she was convicted of the double homicide in 2012. Chandler was sentenced to 2 50-year prison terms, but the verdict and sentence were overturned after an appeals court concluded that the prosecutor had lied to the jury during the trial. The case went to trial for a second time in 2022 and ended in a hung jury, much to the disappointment of the victims' loved ones. In March of 2025, a third jury found Chandler guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder after deliberating for less than 4 hours. The case finally came to a wrap after encountering numerous delays, including after Chandler suddenly fired her defense attorneys and due to her sisters getting in a car accident on their way to the trial. In a statement following the verdict, Shawnee County District Attorney Mike cked applauded the prosecution and jury for their participation in the drawn-out case. He said that sentencing is the next step for Chandler, but no date has been set. Number 13. Luckenson King Pablo. Just weeks before the 2024 Christmas holiday, 32-year-old Melissa Janvier Pablo was gunned down in broad daylight outside the Town Place Suites Hotel in Chelsea, Massachusetts. The longtime Starbucks manager was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital, and police were quick to narrow their sights on her ex-husband, 31-year-old Luckenson King Pablo, who's facing a first-degree murder charge in connection with the case. The Pablos had recently separated, according to prosecutors who revealed in court documents that Luckenson shot Melissa twice at around 8:45 a.m. before fleeing the scene. He later called law enforcement and turned himself in, and has remained in custody ever since. During Luckenson's most recent court hearing, in early February of 2025, the defendant reportedly made several attempts to establish non-verbal contact with Melissa's family. While news outlets did not go into detail about the nature of his behavior, articles stated that Luckenson showed no remorse throughout the brief 5-minute proceeding. His defense attorney argued for bail, but the judge rejected the request and remanded him to county lockup until his next hearing. Number 12. Latoya Crabbe. 35-year-old Latoya Crabbe insisted that she was acting in self-defense when she fatally shot her estranged husband, 36-year-old Curtis Crabbe, at their Manassas, Virginia home in October 2024. She was nevertheless arrested at the scene on suspicion of second-degree murder and detained without bail for the next 4 months, only for prosecutors to drop the charge in February of 2025 after failing to meet a crucial trial preparedness deadline. Latoya was released on bond and reunited with her 3 children, only to be remanded back to county lockup just days later when the state elevated the case against her to first-degree murder. According to the prosecution, Latoya and Curtis were in the process of divorcing. At the time of Curtis's death, just days earlier, Latoya had reportedly sent a text message threatening to harm the entire household. Additionally, she's accused of erasing incriminating doorbell camera footage that prosecutors believe would prove that the shooting was premeditated. Following a grand jury's indictment on the first-degree murder charge, Latoya's attorney, David Doherty, criticized the legal process that briefly landed his client back behind bars. In a statement to Fox 5, Doherty described a typical grand jury proceeding as a closed-door hearing where the only thing the panel hears is a bare-bones synopsis of what the government believes their evidence will prove. After being booked and processed on the charge, Latoya was released on pre-trial supervision. And while this may seem like a victory compared to being in jail, Doherty argued that supervision is unnecessary for his client, who continues to maintain her innocence and plans to fight her case in hopes of clearing her name. Number 11. William Zientek. A successful Vernon Hills, Illinois doctor was killed in front of her young daughter, and the child's father stands accused of the crime. 46-year-old William Zientek is facing a first-degree murder charge in the death of 42-year-old Olga Ducon, who was found bludgeoned and shot at Zientek's Barrington home on November 17th with a child's blanket over her body. She had suffered a fractured skull after being bashed in the head with a baseball bat and had succumbed to a single bullet wound to the chest. The reputable endocrinologist was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital, and investigators were eager to discuss the situation with Zientek. According to prosecutors, Ducon and Zientek were ex-partners, and Ducon had had an order of protection against Zientek since 2021. Zientek is arguing through his attorneys that he acted in self-defense when he killed Ducon, who he claims pointed a gun at him while visiting their daughter at his residence. The story was reportedly corroborated by the former couple's child, but as far as the state is concerned, this does not necessarily mean that Zientek's self-defense claim is true. During Zientek's first court appearance, prosecutors revealed that Ducon had said she feared for her life in her application for the protective order. Zientek pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder and was remanded without bail pending the outcome of the case after the judge deemed him a threat to the community. Number 10. Zakary Preece. 31-year-old Zakary David Preece was a sight for sore eyes following his arrest for stalking and attempting to kill his ex-girlfriend at her Springville, Arizona home. The ordeal began more than a year earlier in September 2023 when he traveled to the woman's residence from his home in Payson, Utah. Upon answering her front door, Preece's ex noticed an odor of alcohol on his breath. She told Preece he wasn't welcome at her home, at which point he allegedly forced his way inside, injuring the woman in the process. According to prosecutors, Preece then retrieved an AR-style rifle from his vehicle and threatened the victim with it for a half hour in front of her young son. The victim escaped with her child after Preece went to take a shower. Preece was arrested the following day on a litany of serious charges including aggravated kidnapping, aggravated burglary, aggravated assault, retaliation against a witness, and domestic violence in the presence of a child. He was released on GPS monitoring, but failed to attend 2 pre-trial conference hearings in October 2024. Law enforcement traced Preece's ankle monitor to his home where it hadn't shown any movement in 11 days, and the home was found empty. While searching the residence, investigators found evidence that Preece had tracked down his ex's new address and was likely therefore in Arizona stalking the woman. Police conducted a welfare check at the victim's home and apparently found no signs of foul play. Roughly a week later, the woman's father spotted Preece's vehicle and called 911 while following the suspect. Preece eventually pulled over and initially refused to exit his vehicle, but eventually stepped out with a gunshot wound. He was treated for his injury and is now facing an additional charge of escape from official custody. While searching Preece's vehicle, officers found a handgun, several AirTags, a trail camera, and a thermal imaging camera, indicating the possibility of a much more sinister ending to the situation if he had managed to evade custody for much longer. He remains in custody at the Maricopa County Jail amid the ongoing case. Number 9. Aldrick Scott. It didn't take long for 47-year-old Aldrick Scott to land at the top of the suspect list following the disappearance of his ex-girlfriend, 43-year-old Carrie Allen. In November 2022, Allen vanished in Omaha, Nebraska after going on a date at a local restaurant, and the man she met for dinner was ruled out as a suspect. Prosecutors believed that Scott had driven to Omaha from his home in Topeka, Kansas, and murdered Allen, but in the absence of a body, they were initially hesitant to charge him accordingly. Allen was therefore initially charged with kidnapping, but by the time a warrant was issued for his arrest, he had fled to Belize. Further investigation revealed that Scott had tracked Allen's location on Snapchat and waited inside her home for more than an hour for her to return from her date. He then fatally shot Allen and buried her body in a shallow grave where her remains were found more than a month later. Scott was arrested in Belize and extradited to Nebraska, where his case went to trial in March of 2024. During the proceedings, the defense claimed that Scott had acted in self-defense and fled the scene in a panic after going to Allen's home to talk to her following their recent breakup. Scott took the stand and shared his story with the jury firsthand, claiming that while the truth was a tough pill to swallow, Allen had threatened him with a gun, causing him to fear for his life. Prosecutors rejected this version of events, arguing that Scott was obsessed with Allen and refused to accept that their relationship was over. The state also highlighted the defendant's apparent lack of remorse throughout the trial, which was later echoed by the judge after Scott was found guilty of first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and using a deadly weapon in the commission of a felony. He was sentenced to life without parole for the murder charge, along with 15 and 30-year terms for the other 2 counts. Number 8. Johnathan Martinez. 20-year-old Yasmin Marquez vanished in Bernalillo County, New Mexico. In April 2022, more than a month later, her remains were found inside her burned-out car in an open field in the Jemez Mountains. Prior to the young woman's disappearance, she had received threatening text messages from her ex-boyfriend, Johnathan Martinez, who was already a suspect in an unrelated homicide at the time of the murder. In the unrelated case, Martinez and 3 other defendants were accused of fatally shooting 19-year-old Travonte Robbins in downtown Albuquerque during the summer of 2021. Nearly a year before Marquez was killed, Martinez was arrested on a warrant for Robbins' murder in May of 2022, roughly a month after Marquez went missing, and he was rebooked on additional murder charges in relation to his ex-girlfriend's death shortly thereafter. In August of 2024, he was found not guilty of murder and conspiracy charges in the Robbins case, but his luck was short-lived. Just 2 months later, a jury found Martinez guilty of first-degree murder and 2 counts of tampering with evidence for killing Marquez. The verdict came after just 2 hours of deliberation, and in early 2025, the defendant was sentenced to life in prison plus 6 years. Martinez had refused to attend his sentencing hearing, but it didn't stop justice from being served, and the punishment was handed down in his absence. Number 7. Micaela Yerlas Coronato. A Florida security guard narrowly escaped unscathed after being targeted by his ex-girlfriend and her new partner in March of 2025. The unnamed victim was working as an armed guard when the suspects, identified by police as 26-year-old Uruguayan national Micaela Yerlas Coronato and 30-year-old Stephen Rashad Rainey, confronted him at his workplace in Oakland Park. Broward County Sheriff's deputies responded to the scene after receiving a report about a fight involving a gun. The victim accused Coronato, his recent ex-girlfriend following the end of their 6-year relationship, of starting a verbal argument. As they walked toward the side of the building, they were confronted by Rainey. During the physical fight that ensued between the 2 men, Coronato allegedly grabbed the victim's gun from his holster, pointed at him, and asked Rainey if she should shoot him. She reportedly tried to fire the weapon, but it failed to discharge because the chamber was empty. The attempted shooting was nevertheless a close call, especially since the gun contained a loaded magazine. At the time of the incident, Rainey was already on felony probation for a previous unrelated charge of throwing a deadly missile. Both he and Coronato were arrested on suspicion of premeditated attempted murder, while Coronato faces an additional count of armed robbery with a firearm and is also in custody on an immigration hold. Number 6. Fernando Gomez. During what was meant to be a fun vacation to the Las Vegas Strip in 2022, 37-year-old Nidia Lopez Garcia was found brutally murdered on the floor of her family's MGM Grand hotel room. Her body bore blunt force trauma, injuries and cuts, making it clear that she had met with foul play, and almost immediately landing her estranged husband at the top of the suspect list. Lopez Garcia and 44-year-old Fernando Gomez had recently separated after 14 years of marriage, but were vacationing from Texas with their 3 children when the murder took place. Police responded to the scene after receiving a 911 call from Gomez, who admitted to slashing Lopez Garcia with a shard of glass from a broken bottle during a heated argument. He pleaded guilty to murder in February 2025, sparing the victim's family from the unavoidably traumatic effects of a trial, and was sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in prison. In an article announcing Gomez's punishment, the Nevada Globe highlighted how the defendant likely received a lighter punishment in exchange for his guilty plea than he would have likely faced if he had been found guilty at trial. And while some may view this as a fair trade-off in the best interests of the victim's surviving loved ones, others would argue that a 20-year term is a far cry from justice, especially for a domestic violence-related homicide. Number 5. Blake Linkous. 18-year-old Natalie Martin was strangled to death by her ex-boyfriend, Blake Linkous, while vacationing in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, in June of 2023. The former couple was traveling with a group of friends in celebration of their recent graduation from high school. When the unexpected life-ending event occurred, the travel companions were unaware that anything was wrong until Linkous emerged from Martin's room at the group's accommodation one morning with a stab wound to the chest and said, "Natalie's not waking up," realizing that something was very wrong. 2 of Martin's friends rushed into the room and attempted to perform CPR, but her body was cold and stiff, and they quickly realized that she had been dead for hours. According to court documents, Martin had been arguing with Blake the previous day over accusations that she was texting another man. During an outing with her friends later that evening, Martin said she wasn't feeling well and returned to the room early with Linkous. Upon returning to the group's rental accommodation, 2 of the former couple's friends had to enter the house through a back door because nobody answered when they knocked on the front door. They heard loud thuds coming from somewhere inside the house and tried to check on Martin, but her door was locked. None of the other vacationers saw Martin or Linkous when they returned to the house throughout the night, but no one apparently saw any reason to think that something was wrong. The 3-year relationship between Martin and Linkous had a troubled history, and the pair had broken up just weeks before Martin's death after Linkous assaulted her in front of witnesses. Following the tragedy, Martin's friend, Brooklyn Farrell, told Fox News that Linkous had thrown Martin across the room during an argument. Linkous apologized profusely afterward and tried to win Martin back, but she was unwilling to fully recommit to the relationship. Following the discovery of Martin's body, Linkous was charged with murder and held without bond. He was slated to go to trial in March of 2025, but pleaded guilty at the 11th hour and was sentenced to 45 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 4. Junior Perez Diaz. In early March of 2025, the murdered body of a missing Bronx woman was found stuffed inside a suitcase along the Sawmill River Parkway just north of New York City. 26-year-old Pamela Alcantara had mysteriously vanished 4 days earlier after being last seen alive inside her Fordham Heights apartment building. Prior to her disappearance, Alcantara had told her mother over the phone that she was heading to a church service, but she never showed up, and surveillance footage from her apartment building showed her entering the elevator and never leaving. 4 days later, the young woman's remains were found in neighboring Yonkers. Following the tragic news, Alcantara's family told reporters that she had been living with her ex-boyfriend, 46-year-old Junior Perez Diaz, and that she was planning to move into her own apartment in the near future. When they entered the former couple's apartment in search of the young woman, they noticed signs of a struggle. Following the discovery of Alcantara's body, police located Perez Diaz's vehicle nearby using a license plate reader and picked him up for questioning. He was subsequently charged with kidnapping, manslaughter, and murder. The accused killer remains behind bars without bond, with his next court date scheduled for late March of 2025. Number 3. Johnathan Maldonado-Cruz. 23-year-old Johnathan Maldonado-Cruz is facing murder and kidnapping charges for killing his ex-girlfriend, 22-year-old Madeline Rose Cuevas, and fleeing to Mexico with their 2 young daughters. Cuevas was shot to death inside her Kings County, California home at around 1 o'clock in the morning in late January of 2025. By the time her body was found, Maldonado-Cruz and the children were nowhere in sight. The accused killer and the victim had recently ended their relationship, according to family members. Following the discovery of Cuevas' remains, authorities began negotiating with Maldonado-Cruz for his surrender and the safe return of the kids. The young man's mother reportedly assisted with these discussions, and he turned himself in at the border 2 days after the murder. Both children were handed over uninjured and are currently being cared for by relatives. In the meantime, Maldonado-Cruz has been extradited to California, where he stands accused of first-degree murder with the special circumstances of lying in wait along with a gun enhancement. He pleaded not guilty, and prosecutors are currently considering whether to pursue the death penalty, despite an ongoing and indefinite moratorium on capital punishment in California, where the most recent execution took place nearly 20 years ago in 2006. Today's topic was requested by Andres Guerin 7162. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Juan Pio Toto. 23-year-old Atalia Pucheta Martinez was found dead on a forest preserve in Busa Woods, Illinois on November 9th, 2024. A passing motorist called police to the scene after noticing the young woman's body. Martinez had recently been reported missing in nearby Mount Prospect. Her ex-boyfriend and the father of her 2 children, 26-year-old Juan Pio Toto, told investigators that Martinez had somehow fallen and fatally hit her head during an argument outside her apartment. He was initially charged with concealment of death based on the suspicion that he had dumped his ex's body in the woods. But prosecutors now believe Martinez was the victim of foul play. But the situation only worsened for Pio Toto after he failed to show up for court. In February of 2024, the judge issued a warrant for his arrest, and in early March, the charges against him were upgraded to murder. Martinez's brother, Jose Luis Pucheta Martinez, told ABC 7 Chicago that his sister had sent Pio Toto home after a discussion, which according to police escalated into a deadly disagreement. Pio Toto remains held without bond as he awaits his next court date, which is scheduled for March 24th, 2025. Number 1. Ceasar Curtis. In a killing that one prosecutor later described as one of the most brutal murders he had seen in his career, 51-year-old Ceasar Curtis was arrested in Muncie, Indiana, in September 2023 for killing his ex-wife after setting fire to her Winchester home months earlier. 46-year-old Marcia Curtis was found dead on an abandoned property 8 days after being reported missing by her family. She had divorced Ceasar less than a year earlier, and her loved ones identified him as the last person she was seen with, making him an automatic person of interest in the case. In March of 2023, the local fire department had responded to a structure fire at the victim's home, where firefighters observed damage to the building's exterior. The arson occurred the day before Ceasar and Marcia's divorce was due to be finalized in court. Ceasar was charged in that case, but was out of custody when he killed Marcia 6 months later. He was found guilty of murder in December 2024 and was sentenced to 78 years in prison. Thanks for watching. Would you rather spend a month in solitary confinement or living at your most recent ex's home? And why? Let us know in the comments section below.